Welcome. I'm standing about a stone's throw away from Mumbai's iconic landmark, the Taj Mahal Hotel, which was one of the 4 targets during 26/11. I'm Mahrukh Inayat, and over the next half hour, we talk about the great betrayal. On a day when a few hours ago, a US court sentenced David Coleman Headley, or as many in Pakistan know him, Dawood Gilani, to 35 years behind bars. But it's a decision that hasn't been taken well either by the 26 victims or their families or the survivors. And it has angered many in India as it is being seen as a huge let-off by the United States and its government. Remember, David Coleman Headley is the man who is the co-conspirator of 26/11, the man who walked these very streets of Mumbai and recce'd the targets, and ultimately leading to 26/11, which killed more than 160 people. It is a day when many in India are angered, saying that in a war that the US fights with India together, the United States has let India down. Let's go across to our Delhi studios where Gaurav Sawant is joining us with what the justice in this particular case said. Even he didn't seem convinced of the role of David Coleman Headley and the final sentence that was being handed out to him. Gaurav.
Oh, indeed, Mahrukh, it was Judge Harry Leinenweber. He said that David Coleman Headley is a terrorist, and I'm not convinced when David Coleman Headley says he is reformed. Mr. Headley is a terrorist. He commits crime, cooperates, and then gets rewarded for cooperation. There is a pattern to this. I am not convinced when he says that he is reformed. So clearly, Judge Harry Leinenweber said it is his responsibility to ensure that people remain safe. Now, I don't have any faith in Mr. Headley when he says he's a changed person. Judge Harry Leinenweber says it's his responsibility to ensure people remain safe. And with the punishment that is being handed out to David Coleman Headley, he's not sure if that punishment is enough. It would have been much easier to impose the death penalty. That's what you deserve. So Judge Harry Leinenweber in that Chicago courtroom, that Dirksen Courthouse building in Chicago, he's very clearly saying that this man deserves death penalty. Even he's surprised why he's not being awarded the death penalty, why the prosecutors are only seeking between 30 to 35 years. The judge is not convinced, but since the prosecutors sought between 30 to 35 years as punishment, he's given the maximum punishment of 35 years in prison without parole, and after that 5 years under supervision. Mahrukh?
Right, Gaurav, clearly as far as the judge in this case is concerned, even he's not convinced. But the question is, why did US authorities finally negotiate a plea bargain with David Coleman Headley? Why did they only demand for 35 years for a man who clearly has a watertight case against him as far as the National Investigative Agency is also concerned? Joining us is also from the Hindustan Times, Pramit Pal Chaudhary. Mr. Chaudhary, thank you so much for joining us here on Headlines today. But clearly, as you see the events pan out, and 35-year sentence being handed to David Coleman Headley, why do you feel that the United States, in your opinion, did not really consider the evidence that was given to him in the NIA charge sheet?
Well, I think it's pretty obvious. There was a plea bargain, and the point of the plea bargain was to get Headley to confess, to talk about the other people, the masterminds of the 26/11. Headley, as you mentioned, was a scout. He was not actually a person who was part of the attack team, but more importantly, he was not part of the mastermind team. That was basically a group of Lashkar-e-Taiba leaders. And to get Headley to confess to the fact that Lakhvi, Major Iqbal, Ilyas Kashmiri were behind this attack, they had to come to a plea bargain with him. They couldn't use torture, they couldn't do anything with him, so the game was basically, he is relatively small fry, let's see if we can use him to try to go further up the ladder. And that was, of course, what was accomplished. As you mentioned, the NIA was allowed to have access to interrogate Headley, and he made it very clear who were the masterminds, which is why we now, in the Indian system, have been pursuing Lakhvi and pressing Pakistan to go after Lakhvi and the other 26/11 masterminds. And ultimately, that was the bargain, and Headley made it clear, I will not tell you any of this unless you get me off the death sentence. Otherwise, there was really no incentive for him to talk the way that he did.
So, Mr. Chaudhary, are you saying that you perhaps don't agree with the Indian standpoint that the United States and the authorities there ignored what were really genuine concerns as far as Indian authorities and agencies are concerned?
Well, you had a trade-off. You could either take Headley and kill him and hang him, and the judge in Chicago said, I think this man deserves to die. But if you did that, then you would not have got the information about the Lashkar leadership's involvement and potentially the ISI's involvement in 26/11. So the game is, you had a trade-off. Do you want to get this other information, or do you want to kill Headley? And eventually, I think the real game for both India and the United States ultimately is, can we somehow slowly but surely squeeze the Lashkar leadership and put them in a position that they will no longer be able to carry out such attacks, or even better, though it's unlikely right now, have them put in jail as well. So that was a straight trade-off that you had, and the decision was eventually to go for the big fish, if you wish.
Right. Stay on with us, Mr. Chaudhary. I'm going across to Gaurav now, who has some more details. Really, all along, the anger that has been seen across either diplomatic channels or clearly with the victims and survivors of 26/11 is that why did the US not perhaps even attempt or try for a possible extradition of David Coleman Headley to India, which is something that the Indian authorities and agencies wanted. Gaurav, take us through this entire, ever since the arrest of David Coleman Headley until now, the kind of evidence that has been given in, and how it in a way exposes American duplicity.
Well, there is a sense of betrayal, and we've been speaking to our sources in the Ministry of Home Affairs and the Ministry of External Affairs. While cooperation with the United States at one level is extremely good, at the level of intelligence sharing, and especially in the case of David Coleman Headley, they say it leaves much to be desired. They're extremely disappointed that the Americans knew David Coleman Headley was spying. He was in touch with Lashkar-e-Taiba. He was in touch with Pakistan's ISI. None of that intelligence was shared with India. And had that happened, perhaps India would have been better prepared to deal with him. One, they could have either denied him a visa, or two, even if they had to grant him a visa, they could have kept him under surveillance. And this was not done. When two countries are fighting a war against terror, and they have a common territory, they have a common enemy, they're fighting terrorists in one common area, and that's to India's west. India says we expected better cooperation, better understanding from the United States. This case proved that they betrayed India.
Well, Mr. Chaudhary, as far as Gaurav Sawant and the evidence really that has come through over the years, many in India feel that it is the great betrayal. Now, my question to you is that some feel that perhaps it is more convenient for the United States to have David Coleman Headley rot in their jails rather than extradite him, because perhaps he has some things to reveal which might not be too convenient for some back in the United States. Would you agree with that?
That's quite possible, but I'll just point out one thing. Headley is an American citizen. No country, including India, extradites its own citizens to another country. It's as simple as that. In every case in which the United States has helped us extradite somebody to India, it has either been an Indian citizen or a citizen of a third country. So let's say Abu Jandal and so on. Governments cannot, are unwilling, it's just a norm in international affairs. Some countries actually ban it outright. China, for example, has it in the constitution, so does France, will not extradite their own citizens. So frankly, while the Indian government may have publicly protested, privately, when you went through the Indian system, everybody said they're never going to extradite him because he's a US citizen. If he'd been a Pakistani passport holder, there would actually been a 50-50 chance that he might have been extradited. But in the same way that India, I should add, would probably never extradite an Indian citizen, no matter how heinous his crimes overseas are, America will not extradite its citizens to a third country, to a second country. And I should add, this is a normal international practice.
Going back to you, Gaurav, clearly that is not the only betrayal or deceit that India feels as far as the United States is concerned, is it?
No, sadly it isn't, and our sources both in the Ministry of Home Affairs and in the Ministry of External Affairs say that this case, especially David Coleman Headley's case, right from the beginning till the time that this 35-year sentence was awarded to him, goes on to indicate that Americans followed double standards. Plea bargain deal with Headley, part of a US plan, so that India doesn't even get to interrogate him. Now, an interrogation did take place, but this was a very sanitized interrogation with an FBI agent present there, with questions vetted, with answers sorted, and with very, very clear, outlines given that you'll only talk about this and nothing else. So sources are saying we could never get to that big picture. While we did get some information about 26/11 Mumbai terror attacks, his contacts in India, who were the people that he was speaking to, where are the sleeper cells, what were the other cases where he was carrying out reconnaissance missions, all of that information we could never get in detail from David Coleman Headley. Now sources are saying that had we got access to him in greater detail, the way America gets access to people like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed or Abu Zubaydah or Abu Faraz al-Libi or Mullah Baradar, of Pakistan Taliban was arrested in Karachi. The Americans insisted that they be given access to him because he was involved in killing of several American citizens. They got access to him the way they wanted. India sadly did not get that kind of access, or several sleeper cells of Lashkar-e-Taiba could perhaps have been neutralized in the country, Mahrukh.
Right, Gaurav. Coming back to you, Mr. Chaudhary, clearly the opinion is that New Delhi could have done more, the United States could have done more as far as the extradition of David Coleman Headley is concerned. But like you said earlier, perhaps it was not possible, and that was very clear right from the very beginning. At this point, how does Pakistan benefit in this entire equation? With the fact that now it is very clear that David Coleman Headley's extradition is not possible. How does this impact the 26/11 trial? Because clearly, with the kind of evidence that could have come forth with his possible extradition to India, could have strengthened the case that India has against Pakistan, wouldn't you say?
Yes, we would presume so. We don't actually know what more information Headley had. We make assumptions about that, but frankly, we have no idea. The real point let's assume that Headley was able to provide us definite information that the ISI was directly connected to 26/11. Let us presume that he was able to show that even the Army Chief of Staff Kayani gave the order. Would that necessarily have made Pakistan put these people in jail? Let's be serious about this. Pakistan cannot and will not put elements of its own military officer corps, let alone the leadership of Lashkar, in jail at the behest of India. Let's be realistic as to what can be accomplished in Pakistan. They will never do so. The evidence against Lakhvi now is already quite overwhelming. Not merely the electronic intelligence that the Americans have shared with us, but also, of course, what Headley and others have told us. Is Pakistan going to put this man behind bars? Probably not. Because Pakistan, Lashkar is simply too powerful. It's the closest militant organization to the army itself, and the army remains, even to this day, the most powerful institution in Pakistan. Zardari, nobody can put an army officer behind bars without the army's willingness to do so. So let's be realistic as to how far we could get. What we have gotten from Headley and what we have gotten from the interrogation is more evidence in the public realm, in the international sphere, of the link between the ISI and Lashkar. Now, we would obviously like that link to be even stronger. And what we accomplish by this is really to shame Pakistan, if you wish, to make it more difficult for them to operate, but ultimately force the Americans to rethink. We already know what we are very clear in our mind about the link between Lashkar and the ISI and the involvement of the Pakistani military in the use of terrorism against India, but strengthen the position within the United States, whether in the US Congress, the State Department, and the broader international community, that Pakistan is effectively a rogue state, that its Pakistan military is the core of the problems in Southwest Asia on the terrorist front. And this is going to be a very slow, long, step-by-step process in which, if you look at it in the big picture, I would argue Headley was a major forward movement for us, because Pakistan has been unable to deny anything for Headley.
A major forward movement for us, says Mr. Right. A major forward movement, you say, Mr. Chaudhary. Well, let's hope so, that this, as far as, calling Pakistan a rogue state, or at least looking at Pakistan as a rogue state, if that kind of thinking grows in America, and if the confessions of David Coleman Headley have been able to achieve that, well, let's hope that stays. But in the meantime, politically in India and also diplomatically, it has been a huge loss for the government. And the opposition has lost no time in making sure that it points that fact out. The government, or Salman Khurshid, the Minister of External Affairs, earlier today said that it was a huge loss. They felt that David Coleman Headley's, I beg your pardon, extradition was extremely crucial. But at the same time, they said that what had been done at this point, but the opposition is not going to let the government get away with it.
This is a much larger landscape, and our concern and our efforts have been explained to the media and to the public at large from time to time. Unfortunately, not everything that we do we can tell you immediately, and for obvious reasons, for strategic reasons. But I can simply say that the fact that an American court has recognized the role of an accused in perpetrating this crime in India is actually is at least a good beginning. We would have liked a severer sentence, and as I said, we would have liked the accused to be tried in India. But at least a beginning has been made. We will continue our efforts to ensure that all such people are extradited and brought to India for trial.
हेडली ने पाकिस्तान और आईएसआई के निर्देश पर भारत में कोहराम मचाया, नरसंहार किया, परंतु उसकी सजा जिस गति के साथ और जिस तरह से कुशलता के साथ अमेरिकी व्यवस्था ने की है, वो अभिनंदन के पात्र है। दूसरा, हेडली को जो 35 वर्ष का कारावास हुआ है, उससे एक बार फिर स्थापित हो गया कि भारत में जो आतंकवाद है उसका प्रयोजन पाकिस्तान से होता है। और तीसरा,
well, the whole world was standing outside that Chicago courtroom waiting for the sentence of David Coleman Headley. Inside for 2 long hours, several of the victims and survivors of 26/11 spoke about David Coleman Headley and what they felt what the sentence should be in the case of this man who has been the co-conspirator in 26/11. One of the men who sat in Lahore and watched how 26/11 panned out during those 3 days. Here's what happened in that courtroom in Chicago.
He wore a grey tracksuit staring at the courtroom's floor. 52-year-old David Coleman Headley shifting uncomfortably moments before he successfully dodged death. But the gaze of 100 eyes shifted when the courtroom charged up with a victim of the Mumbai massacre testifying. Linda Ragsdale, who was shot in the back by one of the Lashkar terrorists, was the only victim to address the court during Thursday's hearing. Holding back her tears, she looked directly at Headley and said, "I now know what a bullet can do to every part of the human body. I know the sound of life leaving a 13-year-old child. These are the things I never needed to know, never needed to experience." She then read from a statement written by another survivor who witnessed the shootout at the Oberoi Hotel. It read, "It would be an appalling dishonor if Headley was sentenced to the 30 to 35 years in prison recommended by the federal prosecutors." But as expected, the US attorney asked for leniency. Citing Headley's deal with the US government, he said, "Headley was involved in a very, very heinous crime, but the unusual nature of Headley's cooperation should be considered." It was then that the US District Judge Harry Linen Weber blasted the plea bargain that Headley had shrewdly cut with the US government. Sounding reluctant about imposing the lesser sentence, he said, and I quote, "Mr. Headley is a terrorist. He commits crime, cooperates, and then gets rewarded for the cooperation. I don't have any faith in Mr. Headley when he says he's a changed person and believes in the American way of life. I do believe that it is my duty to protect the public from Mr. Headley. The sentence I impose, I'm hopeful will keep Mr. Headley under lock and key for the rest of his natural life." It would have been much easier to impose the death penalty. That's what you deserve. The judge then asked Headley if he wanted to make a statement, to which Headley said no. The only words he uttered in the 2-hour-long trial was, "No, Your Honour, I expressed everything in the letter I wrote to you."
Would perhaps the hanging of Ajmal Amer Kasab had managed to bring a sense of closure to the victims and survivors of 26/11? The sentencing of Dawood Gilani, or David Coleman Headley as he is known in the Western world, has perhaps reopened many of those wounds. We are continuing with this special broadcast on a day a US court has sentenced David Coleman Headley to 35 years in prison. But many of the survivors and the families of the victims are not happy. They are angry with the fact that here's a man who has irrefutable evidence against him, reams of proof against the role that he played as far as the 26/11 attack was concerned. He walked these very streets of Mumbai, he recce'd the targets much in advance, and finally, in his own admission, as he said, he watched the entire attack play out from his house in Lahore. On a day when he has been sentenced to just 35 years, and yes, that is how most victims call it, just 35 years. We have with us here Bisham Mansukhani, one of the survivors of 26/11. Bisham, how do you feel today? What is there a sense of anger, or had you perhaps given up hope?
Well, I never really thought we were ever going to be able to extradite David Coleman Headley to India. And let me just make my position clear. I don't think hanging Kasab brought closure to me. I think that's just an illusion of justice. David Coleman Headley was found by the Americans. They've given him a sentence of 35 years. He's 52 years old, so he's going to die before 85. Any which ways, I don't think that's the point. The point is, where does India stand in the war on terror if we can't even influence the Americans to extradite David Coleman Headley? I don't feel any more safer now than I did 4 years ago. I think I'm angry with the government because they try to sell us the illusion of justice by hanging Kasab and then making a protest to the American government about David Coleman Headley. But clearly, the fact that the Americans don't see us as a priority in the war on terror makes me feel rather unsafe and insecure right now.
Would you share the same?
Well, first, my position is that it was a very tragic incident that happened, and what is more important for me is to find out what made him do it. I mean, until I find that answer, it can't bring me closure. I mean, the memory is always going to be there. That's a given. I mean, you walk these streets, there are these memories, and just sentencing someone to prison and confining him is, I mean, if the US really wants to punish him, they should send him to Guantanamo Bay. I mean, everyone has heard stories about it. We don't hear about it much. There is not much reporting done on it, but it is pretty brutal. And if they send him there and they sentence him to 35, 40 years in Guantanamo Bay, that probably would be a reasonable, I mean, it's, that would be something acceptable to me. But, and there is this big protest in the US to shut it down, but it has had its impact on the war on terror. So if you're going to take the worst of the worst and put them there, they should put David Coleman there.
But clearly, many of the survivors of 26/11 feel that justice has not been done. We're joined now by Kia Sher. She unfortunately lost her husband during the 26/11 attack. Kia, do you feel a sense of justice having been achieved today now that David Coleman Headley has been sentenced?
I think that for the magnitude of a crime like this, I don't know if there's any such thing as justice in one sentence or another sentence. I was surprised that they were only asking for a maximum of 35 years. That seemed way too little for such a horrific crime. But yet, that was the decision. So we have to accept it and move on. But justice is a bigger thing. I don't think it's possible really to have justice. All I can do is refuse to be a victim of terrorism by holding on to anger and revenge and spending the rest of my life talking about what should or shouldn't have happened or what this one or that one shouldn't have done. But I'd rather hold a greater vision and become a victor over terrorism and move beyond it by making more positive choices for my life and inspiring the lives of others.
Kia, stay on with us. Headlines Today's reporters have also spoken to a number of other 26/11 survivors and families of the victims. Let's hear what they have to say about the sentencing of David Coleman Headley.
बहुत खुशी की बात है, आज कसाब को भी फांसी हो गया। आज ब्रेडली को भी फांसी दिया जाता तो शायद उसमें से एक आका का कम हो जाता था, लेकिन आज भी बहुत सारे आका हिंदुस्तान में घूम रहे, पाकिस्तान में घूम रहे बिंदास। उनको कब सजा होंगे?
एक्चुअली तो मुझे तो ऐसा बोलना है, जब 26/11 का इतना बड़ा हमला हो गया, जब हम लोग कुलाबा के हम लोग ने इतना हम ये करने के बाद भी, लेकिन जो हेडली को जो दिया है 35 साल का ये उसको उनको एक्चुअली फांसी देना मांगता है एक्चुअली उसके लिए।
सजा वैसे ही जो जजमेंट उन्होंने दी है, जज ने अपॉइंट की है कि भाई जन्म भर के जब तक जिंदा है तब तक वो जेल में सड़ता रहे, तो अपना उसको भुगतना पड़े। तो मैंने जो किया है मैं भुगता हूँ।
इट्स गुड, ऐसी सजा मिलनी चाहिए ताकि जो टेररिस्ट है उनको पता चले, उनको थोड़ा डर हो कि अगर ऐसा वो करते हैं तो उन्हें सजा मिलेगी।
Clearly, Bhishma, just like the anger that you feel, not towards perhaps the US government, but more towards your own authorities, that this should have been dealt with in a more decisive manner. Do you feel that perhaps New Delhi, as far as New Delhi is concerned, they say they've given all the proof to the US? Was this a sham that was going on as far as US agencies are concerned right from the beginning? Is that a sense that you get as a survivor?
Well, I can't hold the US government and their intelligence services to account, but I can certainly hold our government in New Delhi to account. We have been impotent and cack-handed right from the beginning. We were not proactive enough in terms of sharing intelligence with the Americans before something like this happened, and when they managed to arrest and get David Coleman Headley to confess, we were simply going like we were like clerks protesting in anger that they should hand him over. It's just simply not as simple as handing over evidence for consideration. We've got to simply ask ourselves in the most crudest of manners, what can we barter with the Americans if we want him to give us David Coleman Headley? What do we have to barter? Have we helped them in Afghanistan? Are we their partners in fighting the war on terror worldwide? No, we want to internalize these issues. We simply want to sit on our hands and talk about peaceful solutions and negotiations and hope that Pakistan will hand over Hafiz Saeed. The Americans showed us how they got Osama bin Laden. We clearly wouldn't look at such options for Hafiz Saeed. David Coleman Headley and Qasab are not the issue. Hafiz Saeed is the issue. That's the elephant in the room that we're not talking about. We're never going to bring him to justice, and unless that happens, none of the survivors or families of the victims will find closure. That's what we should be talking about right now. And the fact is, if the Americans wanted to get Hafiz Saeed, if Hafiz Saeed had perpetrated the terrorist attack in America, they would have had him. If David Coleman Headley was wanted by the Americans and was in India, we would have given him over. I think that says it all.
I'd like to bring Mr. Chaudhary into the discussion at this point of the Hindustan Times, who's still with us. Mr. Chaudhary, clearly the sense is that perhaps the anger that is being seen amongst the survivors of 26/11 is the accusation against the Indian government of perhaps being a soft state under the present circumstances. What would you say to ordinary citizens who have been impacted by 26/11 and crying out for the government to do more, do perhaps something more decisive?
Yes, I think what we have to recognize is that there was definitely failures on the part of the Indian government. For example, as we all know now, the Americans did tip us off. They tipped us off in September. They tipped us off in October. We carried out we tightened maritime security after October. And this was, we assume, we don't actually know where the source of the American information was, but definitely Headley was probably one of the sources. And we called off the naval patrols just several days before the attack because the attack didn't seem to be happening. For me, that was an act of criminal negligence by the part of the Indian system. And we just didn't have the structures or the systems or the experience of security, especially at the state level, on how to handle this properly. We should have blocked off 2 months of time for the maritime patrol. We should have tightened security on all fronts. But more importantly, as we know what happened in 26/11, our entire security apparatus was completely, dysfunctional. We had 4 different administrations for maritime security. We had an NSG that had no capacity to travel anywhere outside Delhi. These are the type of things that we needed to have done earlier. I mean, we've been under terrorist attack now for almost 15 years. We should have solved these problems a long time ago. And to this day, it's not clear to me we have solved these problems at all. We still don't have a national center for national counterterrorism center. We still haven't worked out the jurisdictional issues. So that's yes.
Right, Mr. Chaudhary, we'll come back to you, but let me go across to Kia at this point. Kia, you spoke about moving on, about thinking of positive steps forward. But today, especially now that David Coleman Headley has been sentenced and he will be behind bars for the next 35 years, the better part of his life, one would hope. Clearly, that would be let me ask you this, a final chapter for you in this in the senseless terror that you have gone through so personally and the personal loss that you have seen?
It's certainly one of the chapters that will be closed at this point. But it sounds like there's a lot more issues that still need to be addressed in relation to the attacks. For me personally, because I feel so connected now to the city of Mumbai, because I've been coming here now for a couple of years, that I would like to see us really be able to join together to bring peace in education and create something really positive on many levels of society. Although it's true that we have to go deeply into these matters, people do need to continue the investigation to learn as much as possible. I'm sure there's still many unanswered questions, so that has to continue, but that's not my role in it. So all I can do is from my side to say, how can I serve the most in this situation? Life cannot be the same ever again. I can't go back to business as usual. So now what can I give? So to me, it's about connecting in new ways to find better and more effective solutions to some of these issues.
Right. At this point, our Headlines Today reporters have also spoken to some other 26/11 survivors. We have been hearing their voices through the course of the day. Over the past 4 years, they have been speaking time and again of the sense of anger, loss, and the desperate need of closure that they speak of. Here are some more voices angry at the fact that a man who has been one of the main conspirators in the 26/11 conspiracy is today only being let off with 35 years.
नहीं, संतुष्टि नहीं मिलते उसको, तो वो फांसी वो देना ही उसको हमें अच्छा लगेगा। लेकिन मैं तो इतना चाहूंगी कि ज्यादा देर उनको क्योंकि इन लोग को इतने देर संभाल के रखते ना, तो उधर दूसरा प्लान शुरू हो जाता है।
उसे 35 साल की सजा दी हो तो कम ही है, उसे फांसी ही देनी चाहिए।
Well, a lot has been spoken about the sense of closure that many of the 26/11 survivors are demanding. Clearly, it's been more than 4 years, but when news comes of a man like David Coleman Headley being sentenced to just 35 years after having achieved a plea bargain with the US authorities, then there is that sense of anger. We have been speaking to a lot of the survivors and victims of 26/11 and their families. Suril, at this point, I want to ask you, we've been speaking to Kia as well, and she says, going forward, the emphasis should more be on what the government should do. Perhaps it has been, as many have viewed, a soft state in the past, according to some. But going forward, there should be that kind of a mechanism that something like 26/11 doesn't happen again. Living in Mumbai, having seen the carnage of 26/11, how would you take that process forward? As an individual, as a citizen, what do you demand of the government or mechanisms around you to ensure that something like this doesn't happen again?
See, it would be grossly speculative to say that this won't happen or this will happen, but at least there should be better, paramedic services, and when such an incident happen, there should be enough provisions made. Like, I remember Rudolph Giuliani speaking after the WTC attacks that they knew something like World Trade Center was a target, but they never thought of it would take place through air. They had made all the provisions for any other type of attack, like a bomb blast or things like that around it. They'd taken the precautionary measures. So when it actually happened, yes, there was a lot of loss and everything, but they were able to minimize the damage. Here we sit right here, Taj sits, there's a naval base here, 4 kilometers down the road is a military base, and such a thing happens. I mean, that means they were not really taking security protection seriously. You can, so I mean, it's very critical that we have better, post-attack situations so that people can be treated, people can be, because we don't know how many people have died in those hospitals after the attacks. Those numbers don't come out. And because of that, the numbers are always different. And plus the amount of post-trauma, the psychological impact of this attack, I still get, sometimes these post-traumatic, I've been taking some medication for it. And it is, so how do you handle those issues, which are more psychological in nature? You can be diplomatic about it, but certain things you have to take some precautions.
That's right. No, Bishnu, finally coming to you for a final word. There is, I can sense the kind of anger that you feel, perhaps more directed at our own authorities than perhaps looking at the United States at this point. But and I'm going to ask a very cliched question, something perhaps we ask each of ourselves every single day. Do you feel safer today, considering it's been 4 years, after 26/11, in a country where a lot has been done to curb terror? Perhaps there is an argument out there that when you have a case like David Coleman Headley, or the fact that we have reams and reams as far as Hafiz Saeed is also concerned, but not much is being done, do you feel a lot safer than perhaps you would have felt in the immediate aftermath of 26/11?
I don't feel safer any more now than I did then. In fact, I probably would feel safer inside the dark room in the Taj where I was with several other people for 12 hours. Isn't that ironical? The reality that I faced on that particular day inside the hotel for more than 12 hours brought me to understand just how vulnerable I was. And over the last 4 years, I've just come to believe just the fact that every man for himself. We are as vulnerable and expendable to a government that truly doesn't care about us. There's a lot that's been said about the Americans in terms of how they go about on the war on terror, but let's be clear. The American government at least has the decency to say that they will do anything and everything to protect their citizens from terror attacks of this sort. Our government does not have the ethic or the conviction to do anything like that.
Okay, let me finally come to you, Kia, for a final word. Had you been in that courtroom today in Chicago, where the sentence was read out for David Coleman Headley, and I know this must be tough to answer, what would you perhaps have said to him? Had you been given a chance to, testify against this man, or look at him sitting there as he was hearing the sentence being read out?
Yeah, I spoke to Linda Ragsdale, my friend who was there, right before she went into the courtroom, and she shared with me the statement that she read to him, and I agreed with it. And then I added a few words for her to share as well. And I do feel it's an appalling dishonor, really, the 35-year sentence in relation to the magnitude of this crime. He didn't pull the trigger, but he certainly, I hold him equally responsible as the young man who did pull the trigger. But I believe that what Linda did was very courageous, to sit right in front of him, and she was under the table with my daughter. And I'm glad that she had a chance to share her feelings with him face to face.
Well, Kia, I believe, I'm sure it is very hard for you to speak about it, even though it's been just 4 years after 26/11. Thank you so much for speaking with us. Kia Sher, one of the 26/11 survivors. We also have Bisham Mansukhani here with me, as well as Suril Desai and Mr. Chaudhary of the Hindustan Times Strategic Affairs expert and foreign editor. Thank you so much. And this is a live broadcast here from Mumbai on a day when David Coleman Headley has been sentenced to 35 years behind bars. Not enough. That's what most in India say.